Robert Greene did not emerge out of nowhere as a best-selling author, capable of influencing millions of people to see the world through the lenses of power, seduction, and psychological warfare. His journey is marked by seemingly ordinary experiences that intertwined into a web of sharp social observation and a rare ability to interpret the backstage of human behavior. Before becoming a world-renowned writer, Greene worked in more than 50 different jobs, taking on roles in publishing houses, magazines, advertising agencies, and even operational and artistic areas. This provided him with a unique experience, direct contact with different social layers, from sophisticated intellectual circles to humble and underestimated positions. Each of these experiences served as a living laboratory, where he silently studied recurring patterns of power, submission, manipulation, and strategy, whether in the corporate world, personal relationships, or behind-the-scenes politics. The diversity of environments in which Robert Greene was immersed allowed him not only to observe but also to personally experience the oscillation between being dominated and dominating. This constant contrast between command and obedience shaped his realistic understanding of human nature. He realized that, regardless of time or context, human relationships are always permeated by invisible games of power. This became even clearer during his time in Hollywood, where he directly witnessed the intensity of ego battles, temporary alliances, and carefully orchestrated betrayals behind the scenes of the entertainment industry. It was there that Greene understood that seduction and manipulation are not occasional deviations, but fundamental gears of human interaction, used both by artists seeking recognition and by executives willing to sacrifice everything for their rise. When he finally found his path as a writer, Greene carried with him not only the repertoire of a scholar, but also the weight of someone who had lived what he was writing about. His books were not born from distant academic theories, but from a fusion of history, philosophy, psychology, and practical experiences that validated each observation. He began writing The 48 Laws of Power while working as a copywriter on cultural projects, compiling notes he had been taking for years on historical figures who exercised extraordinary dominance. Every biography he read, every royal court account, every strategy of a general or courtier was annotated, dissected, and connected with the scenes he himself witnessed in the present. The result was the construction of a work that not only transmitted knowledge, but revealed a universal pattern of human nature. Power always manifests itself, whether on a golden throne or in a modest meeting room. Another decisive point in Greene's formation was his ability to recognize that history should not be read merely as a record of events, but as a manual of human behavior. He realized that leaders, generals, courtiers, and seducers faced dilemmas similar to those we still face today: how to gain authority, how to avoid betrayal, how to defend against invisible adversaries, and how to awaken desire or fear in others. By rescuing these stories and converting them into laws and principles, Greene built a bridge between past and present, showing that even in modern times, the basic instincts that drive humanity remain the same. His work, therefore, is not only a treatise on power, but also a kind of psychological map that reveals the hidden gears of human relationships. Moreover, Greene has always displayed a disenchanted, almost clinical view of the human condition. Instead of romanticizing social behavior, he exposes it with a coldness that unsettles yet fascinates. This is why many consider him an heir to thinkers such as Machiavelli, Balthazar Gracian, and Sun Tzu. Like these classical authors, Greene believes that power is not an accident or an exception, but a structural, inevitable, and permanent force that permeates all human relationships. He does not write to judge but to reveal, offering his readers a cruel and realistic mirror of the world in which they live. It is precisely this absence of moralism that makes his works both dangerous and irresistible, as they force readers to confront uncomfortable truths that society often tries to hide under the mask of ethics and cordiality. In summary, the origins of Robert Greene as a thinker of power cannot be explained solely by the accumulation of historical readings, but mainly by a life trajectory marked by diversity, sharp observation, and direct contact with the essence of human relations in different spheres. He transformed the multiplicity of jobs and experiences into creative fuel, turning frustrations into analytical tools and defeats into material for understanding social games. This unconventional path gave him the legitimacy to write works that would become true manuals of strategic behavior. Greene does not speak from above, but as someone who has been inside the system, seen its gears, and decided to reveal to the world the secrets that few dare to confess. To understand the essence of Robert Greene's works, it is necessary to delve into what he calls the universal drive for power. Human beings, in their deepest essence, are constantly seeking to expand their influence, secure their position within the group, and control the variables around them. This pursuit is not always conscious. Often it manifests in subtle gestures, silent disputes, strategic alliances, or simple attempts to stand out in a social environment. Greene presents power as an instinct, as vital as survival and reproduction, showing that the need to dominate, manipulate, or seduce is not the product of a corrupted morality, but an integral part of human nature itself. What truly moves men, according to him, are not noble ideals or altruistic feelings, but the deep desire not to be crushed by external forces and to guarantee, even if only as an illusion, control over their own circumstances. This view is reinforced by the idea that power is not only something to be conquered, but also something to be projected. From childhood, individuals learn to read signs of authority and submission, internalizing invisible codes of hierarchy. A simple look, a tone of voice, a body posture already carry silent messages about who holds command in an interaction. Greene points out that men are constantly calibrating their behavior to adapt to these dynamics, and that true power comes from the ability to interpret these subtleties and act in a way that always ensures advantage. It is at this point that his analysis differs from other thinkers. He does not limit himself to the macro history of great leaders, but descends into the micro gestures of daily life, revealing that power exists both in international diplomacy and in a simple conversation between co-workers. The psychology of power, therefore, cannot be reduced to a mere will for wealth or prestige, since both are only symbolic means of expressing dominance. Greene demonstrates that the true driving force behind the pursuit of power is the fear of irrelevance, the need to be recognized, feared, or desired. That is why power takes on so many forms. It may be the silent obedience someone imposes in a room without uttering a word, or the magnetic seduction that makes crowds bow before a charismatic figure. What drives men is not morality, but the perception of advantage, not compassion, but the instinct for self-preservation. This is the foundation of his vision. Every human behavior, even those that appear altruistic, contains hidden layers of strategy, interest, and dispute. Power, in its psychological dimension, also feeds on primitive emotions. Envy, resentment, fear, and desire are invisible forces that shape decisions and behaviors, even when apparent logic tries to conceal them. Greene observes that most people try to repress or deny these emotions, but those who recognize and use them strategically gain a natural advantage over others. A leader who understands envy can weaponize it against his rivals. A seducer who knows the power of desire can channel others' emotions for his own benefit. The secret lies not in denying human nature, but in accepting and exploiting it. This stance, which may seem cynical at first glance, is precisely what makes his work so striking. They do not preach unattainable idealism, but instead embrace brutal realism that exposes the gears of social life. Another central aspect of the psychology of power is illusion. For Greene, human beings live more by perceptions than by facts. Objective reality matters less than how it is perceived, and whoever controls the narrative controls perception. This means that power does not lie only in force, but above all, in the ability to shape others' vision. The manipulation of symbols, the crafting of images, and the management of reputation become decisive weapons. An individual who projects confidence, even in the midst of chaos, is seen as a leader. One who shows hesitation, even while holding the truth, loses ground. What drives men is not only concrete reality, but the invisible game of appearances that sustains the social structure. Finally, Greene argues that the pursuit of power is as old as civilization itself. From the earliest tribes, where the strongest commanded respect through violence, to the great empires, where diplomats and courtiers manipulated through words and subtle gestures, the essence remains the same. Men desire to control others in order not to be controlled. The psychology of power is not a modern invention, but an evolutionary inheritance. The difference is that today the battlefields are not only thrones and palaces, but also boardrooms, social networks, and even homes. What truly drives men is the instinct for social survival, translated into invisible struggles for influence, status, and recognition. It is this raw unmasking that makes Robert Greene's work so disturbing. He reveals that behind the masks of civilization, we are still gladiators seeking advantage in the great theater of life. When Robert Greene published The 48 Laws of Power in 1998, the impact was immediate. The book quickly surpassed the barrier of being a simple treatise on strategies to become a kind of modern Bible of human behavior in competitive environments. More than just a collection of principles, the work functioned as a brutal and honest manual on how to survive and thrive in a world governed by games of influence. Greene structured each of the laws as if they were non-negotiable maxims, drawn not from abstract theories, but from historical examples of kings, generals, diplomats, courtiers, and leaders who, in different eras, applied or ignored such rules with fatal consequences. The work, therefore, established itself as a guide not only for those seeking to conquer power, but also for those wishing to protect themselves from the silent moves of those who already hold it. Each law presented by Greene has a dual characteristic. While teaching how to act, it also reveals what must be avoided to prevent becoming a victim of others' manipulations. For example, the famous Law 1, never outshine the master, shows how the mere attempt to shine too brightly in front of a superior can turn into a sentence of destruction. This is not just a rule of etiquette, but a cruel reminder. The powerful in any era tend to eliminate those who threaten their position, even subtly. This and other laws reveal that power is not a territory of equality, but a fragile field of forces, where even the smallest mistake can be interpreted as betrayal or challenge. Greene thus exposes that living in society is essentially navigating waters where any misstep can come at a high cost. Another emblematic example is Law 15, crush your enemy totally. Contrary to the romantic vision of clemency, Greene argues that leaving a threat partially alive is preparing the ground for future revenge. This law, illustrated with examples of emperors and generals, demonstrates the coldness required to consolidate a position of power. At the same time, it exposes the cruel face of the human game. Survival demands hard and often merciless decisions. Here lies the essence of the book. There is no room for illusions of universal benevolence, but instead a raw and unfiltered exposure of what happens when dealing with human ambition, fear, and resentment. The 48 Laws of Power also stands out for the way Greene employs historical and literary narratives to illustrate each principle. From Louis XIV, the Sun King, who turned the French court into a theater of domination, to Talleyrand, the cold diplomat who survived opposing regimes by manipulating his image, the author weaves a tapestry of examples that serve both as lessons and as warnings. The reader is transported to different contexts, but always with the sense that the same games of power repeat in their own life, albeit on a smaller scale. This universality is what guarantees the book's strength. It shows that human beings in any era are trapped by the same instincts of control and submission. At the same time, Greene makes it clear that the laws are not manuals for literal and blind application. Power requires adaptation, subtlety, and context reading. Knowing when to apply a particular law is as important as knowing its content. The mistake of many superficial readers is believing that simply following the steps guarantees domination over others. But the author emphasizes that power is dynamic, fluid, and dependent on circumstances and emotions. Applying a law at the wrong time can be as disastrous as ignoring it. Thus, the work demands from the reader not only strategic intelligence, but also psychological sensitivity to read the invisible signs that permeate every social interaction. The success of the book is also due to its direct and almost clinical language. Greene does not sugarcoat the truths he presents, does not attempt to morally justify his laws, nor does he build a manual of virtues. He simply describes what works and what does not in the field of power, leaving ethical judgment to the reader. This absence of moralism is what makes the work controversial, but also irresistible. Many critics accuse him of encouraging manipulation and coldness, but it is precisely this brutal honesty that attracts readers. Greene does not show how the world should be, but how it truly is. Ultimately, The 48 Laws of Power is a survival manual. In a world where everyone plays, consciously or unconsciously, the game of influence, ignoring the rules means being manipulated without even realizing it. Greene offers therefore a map for those who wish not only to rise but also to protect themselves against the invisible attacks of the social environment. That is why the book continues to be read by entrepreneurs, politicians, artists, military officers, and even young people in search of a guide to navigate the complexity of human relations. It does not promise kindness but clarity. It does not deliver magic formulas but exposes the raw truth. Power is an inevitable game, and those who do not learn the rules will inevitably be pushed off the board. Among all the pages of the 48 Laws of Power, there are some that shine with a dark intensity, provoking both fascination and repulsion. These are the most feared laws, the ones that seem to cross the barrier of traditional ethics and expose without filters the brutality of human games. They are forbidden because they contradict social values such as loyalty, honesty, and compassion, but at the same time they are irresistible because they convey raw truths that everyone perceives, even secretly, in daily coexistence. Greene does not present them as moral recommendations, but as statements of fact. They are mechanisms of power that have worked throughout history, used by kings, courtiers, strategists, and seducers, and that continue to operate today in new disguises. The strength of these laws lies precisely in their contradiction. No one admits to applying them, but everyone knows that those who dare to use them gain an advantage. One of the most controversial examples is Law 15, crush your enemy totally. It is disturbing because it touches the root of the human instinct to seek clemency and believe in lasting reconciliations. Greene demonstrates, however, that leaving an adversary partially standing is opening the door to resentment and future revenge. This law reminds us that in power struggles, mercy can turn into weakness and weakness into ruin. What makes it irresistible is the fact that, in historical retrospect, countless empires fell because their leaders failed to completely eliminate pockets of opposition. Thus, the reader is faced with a dilemma. Morally, total destruction seems cruel. Strategically, it seems inevitable. Another unsettling law is Law 3, conceal your intentions. In a society that values transparency and the discourse of authenticity, admitting that dissimulation is a powerful weapon sounds almost like heresy. However, Greene shows that predictability is the greatest gift an adversary can receive. Revealing one's plans opens doors to sabotage and early resistance. Concealing intentions, on the other hand, creates a fog that confuses, destabilizes, and forces others to act in the dark. The fascination of this law lies in its everyday applicability. Everyone knows that in interviews, negotiations, or even relationships, revealing everything too quickly is giving away power. The moral prohibition against deception exists, but the irresistible effectiveness of the practice speaks louder. No less disturbing is Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Here, Greene ventures into delicate psychological territory, revealing that every human being carries hidden vulnerabilities, desires, fears, traumas, or vanities, which, when identified, can be exploited to gain influence. This law awakens fear because it confronts us with the possibility of being studied and manipulated, like pieces on a chessboard. But it also awakens desire, because it offers the promise of absolute control in any interaction. It is the kind of law that no one wants to admit using, but which everyone instinctively tries to understand when dealing with bosses, partners, or rivals. Perhaps the most controversial of all is Law 34. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. This law is not about gratuitous arrogance, but about the perception that the way an individual presents himself directly influences how he will be treated. Greene demonstrates that projected self-confidence creates an aura of respect, even when there is no real power behind it. This idea is unsettling because it unmasks an uncomfortable truth. Society values the appearance of strength as much as strength itself. What makes it irresistible is the promise that anyone, by projecting greatness, can manipulate perceptions and obtain privileges that would otherwise be denied. These laws are feared because they lay bare the dark side of human nature, shattering the illusion that social interaction is guided by kindness and sincerity. Greene, in presenting them, does not invite the reader to become a villain but issues a warning. These rules are at work whether you want them to be or not. Ignoring them means remaining vulnerable. Understanding them means having the chance to defend yourself, and if you wish, to use them for your own benefit. They are forbidden because they challenge the collective moral code, but irresistible because they offer the key to navigating with an advantage in a world governed by invisible forces. Ultimately, these laws reveal that the boundary between what is right and what is effective is much thinner than we would like to admit. Iftari, the 48 Laws of Power, revealed to the world the mechanisms of manipulation and survival in competitive environments. The Art of Seduction took Robert Greene's analysis into an even more delicate and fascinating territory, that of human desires and emotions. Published in 2001, the book dives into what he calls the psychology of enchantment, showing how seduction goes far beyond the sexual and romantic sphere. For Greene, to seduce is, above all, the art of influencing others through desire, imagination, and emotion, building an invisible power that can be more effective than brute force or formal authority. In this sense, seduction, in his work, appears as one of the most powerful instruments of social domination. Greene does not treat seduction as a superficial game of beauty or charm, but as an archetypal force that crosses centuries and shapes societies. He identifies universal patterns in the seducers of history, from Cleopatra and Giacomo Casanova to political leaders and artistic figures who knew how to awaken in others a mixture of fascination, desire, and dependence. The author's great revelation is that seduction is not limited to conquering romantic partners. It is present in political speeches, advertising campaigns, business negotiations, and even in everyday social interactions. Wherever there is a human being seeking to persuade another, seduction is a potential weapon. To structure his analysis, Greene presents different archetypes of seducers, each representing a distinct strategy of enchantment. There is the rake, who conquers through the intensity of pleasure, the charmer, who dominates through empathy and care, the star, who attracts through an aura of brilliance and unreachability, and the ruler, who imposes presence and confidence. These archetypes are not fixed formulas, but behavioral models that the reader can identify in themselves and in others, understanding how they function and how they can be exploited. The impact of this mapping is immediate. By recognizing the patterns, it becomes possible both to use them consciously and to defend against those who employ them. Seduction, however, is not limited to personality types. Greene emphasizes the role of narrative and mystery. The seducer creates stories, sparks imagination, and leads the other into a state of emotional dependence in which desire becomes greater than logic. The secret lies in feeding fantasies and avoiding monotony, making the victim of seduction project onto the seducer what they most long to find. In this sense, seduction is a carefully crafted illusion in which the power of the enchanter lies in never revealing everything but always suggesting more. This dynamic creates a game of continuous attraction in which curiosity and desire keep the relationship alive. Another central aspect of the book is the idea that seduction operates best through subtlety. Unlike force, which imposes itself aggressively, seduction is patient, strategic, and immersive. It infiltrates slowly, gaining ground until the target can no longer resist. Greene shows that effective seduction is never too explicit, because desire needs room to grow in the imagination. The fascination lies in what is unsaid, in what is suggested, in what remains incomplete. This is why so many leaders and artists managed to keep passionate followers. They never gave everything away, but always left something unresolved, something that kept people captive in expectation. The work also addresses the dangers of poorly executed seduction. When the seducer becomes predictable, when the illusion is broken, or when desire turns into possessiveness, the spell can backfire. Greene shows with historical examples how many conquerors of hearts and minds ended up destroyed by their own skill, becoming victims of obsessions, revenge, or emotional collapse. This warning reinforces the author's realistic view. Seduction is indeed a powerful weapon, but also a risky one, for it stirs the deep psyche of people, activating fears and desires that can escape control. In the end, The Art of Seduction is not just a manual of conquest, but a dense exploration of how desire governs human relationships. It reveals that behind political alliances, multi-million-dollar businesses, and even cultural transformations, there has always been a game of seduction between leaders and followers, between influencers and the influenced, between creators and admirers. Greene shows that true power lies not only in commanding by force, but in being able to make others desire to follow, obey, and surrender. This is the essence of seduction, transforming another's desire into an instrument of control, making the dominated believe they are acting of their own will, when in fact they are trapped in the invisible web of a masterful seducer. Among Robert Greene's most disturbing and revealing ideas is the notion that we are permanently performing roles. For him, social life is not an authentic expression of who we are, but a theater in which each individual wears masks appropriate to the audience before them. This theater, however, is not merely the result of conscious choice. It is an instinct of self-preservation, a necessity for social survival. From an early age, we learn that showing completely who we are can make us vulnerable, provoke rejection, or open the door to attacks. That is why we hide certain parts, exaggerate others, and shape our presence to create the desired impression. Greene calls this mechanism psychological armor, which guarantees protection while also granting us power over others. These masks are not just superficial disguises. They become temporary identities we assume in different contexts. At work, we may adopt the mask of unbeatable competence, even if inside we feel insecure. In relationships, we use the mask of care or seduction to gain trust or desire. In social circles, we create versions of ourselves that fit into the group's expectations. Greene shows that there is no social life without masks, and that the attempt to be completely authentic in all contexts is in fact an illusion that exposes weaknesses. The game of power requires the ability to switch masks according to the situation, without ever clinging to just one. Greene's analysis resonates with an old tradition of thinkers who saw human behavior as performance. Shakespeare already declared that all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. Greene updates this metaphor for modernity, showing how social media has expanded the theater of life. Today, each profile is a carefully crafted mask, a character projected to impress, seduce, or manipulate invisible audiences. The difference is that in the digital world, masks have become permanent, and many confuse their personas with their true identity. This confusion, according to Greene, makes people even more vulnerable to manipulation, because those who do not control their own masks end up being controlled by the masks of others. The most unsettling aspect of the mask theory is that it reveals there are no purely transparent relationships. Behind every gesture of friendliness there may be calculation. Behind every smile there may be strategy. Behind every word there may be a hidden interest. Greene does not say this to dehumanize interactions, but to expose that social reality is built on layers of representation. Those who ignore this theater become easy prey. Those who understand it can read the roles others play and respond strategically. Recognizing the mask of an authoritarian boss, for example, makes it possible to discover where his weakness lies. Identifying the mask of a seducer helps resist his charm. At the same time, Greene shows that masks are not necessarily negative. They can be instruments of self-protection and tools for advancement. Using the right mask can open doors, win allies, and avoid unnecessary conflicts. A leader who wears the mask of calm in the midst of chaos transmits security and gains authority, even if inside he is overcome with fear. A person who adopts the mask of confidence in a negotiation may emerge victorious, even without all the technical arguments. The power of the mask lies precisely in shaping perception, and as Greene already affirmed in his Laws of Power, perception is reality. However, there is also the risk of getting lost in masks. When an individual believes too much in the role they play, they run the danger of becoming alienated from their own essence, becoming a prisoner of the character they created. Greene warns that the true master of power is the one who knows how to use masks consciously and strategically, but never confuses themselves with them. The secret lies in balance, manipulating the image one projects without ever forgetting that behind it all, there is a hidden self that must remain free. This awareness is what separates skillful manipulators from those who end up destroyed by the very theater they built. In the end, the concept of social masks reveals the depth of Greene's analysis. Life in society is a continuous spectacle in which everyone is both actor and spectator at the same time. No one escapes this theater, but some manage to write the script and direct the scene, while others are limited to following imposed roles. For Greene, Understanding this game is one of the greatest weapons a person can have. After all, those who master the use of masks not only protect their vulnerability, but also gain the ability to lead others like puppets on an invisible stage. Robert Greene further expanded his perspective on power and human behavior when he published The 33 Strategies of War, a work in which he transported military principles into everyday life. But unlike what the title might suggest, he does not write only about armies and traditional battlefields. Greene argues that true war takes place in invisible dimensions, in personal relationships, professional disputes, emotional clashes, and even within the mind of each individual. The battlefield is not merely physical but psychological, and those who fail to understand this dimension are condemned to be manipulated, defeated, or dominated. In this sense, war is constant, silent, and inevitable, and strategy becomes the only way to survive. For Greene, the first stage of psychological warfare is to accept that everyone at some level is involved in disputes. The illusion of absolute peace is just that, an illusion. Even in the most stable environments, there is competition for prestige, recognition, resources, or affection. Those who believe they are outside the game end up becoming the preferred victims of those who play consciously. That is why strategy requires brutal clarity, to recognize that every gesture, every alliance, and every word carry potential implications of conflict. This perspective may seem pessimistic, but in Greene's view it is liberating because it allows the individual to prepare instead of being taken by surprise. At the heart of psychological warfare is control over the adversary's mind. Greene shows that it is not enough to defeat someone by force. It is necessary to break their confidence, manipulate their perception, and undermine their emotional stability. Generals throughout history understood this principle. Many battles were won even before the first blow was struck, when the enemy was already shaken by doubt, fear, or misinformation. In modern life, this logic translates into tactics such as the creation of narratives, the use of disinformation, the control of negotiation rhythms, and the ability to subtly provoke insecurities in rivals. Victory belongs to those who dominate not only physical space, but above all mental space. Greene also analyzes the role of internal discipline as a strategic weapon. Psychological warfare is not only external, it takes place within the individual, who must fight against uncontrolled emotions. Fear, anger, and vanity are internal enemies as dangerous as any visible opponent. For this reason, one of the central strategies is learning to master oneself, maintaining calm amid chaos and making cold decisions in moments of pressure. Mental discipline for Greene is what transforms ordinary people into strategists capable of overcoming even stronger enemies. This is a lesson that echoes both in Sun Tzu's military treatises and in modern reflections on emotional intelligence. Whoever governs their own mind governs the game. A striking point in Greene's analysis is the idea that every war is also a spectacle. The enemy must not only be defeated, but humiliated, demoralized, and displayed as an example to others. This creates a psychological effect that discourages future resistance. In the same way, in the corporate or social world, symbolic victories are often more effective than practical ones. By exposing an adversary's weaknesses, by demonstrating public dominance, or by winning allies with theatrical gestures, an individual establishes an aura of invincibility that becomes a weapon in itself. Thus, psychological warfare is also a war of images, in which reputation and perception are more valuable than brute power. Finally, Greene emphasizes that strategy should not be confused with unrestrained aggression. A true strategist does not fight every battle, but chooses the ones that matter, retreats when necessary, and deceives when convenient. The essence of psychological warfare lies in patience, calculation, and the ability to use the mind as an invisible sword. The goal is not only to win, but to win without wasting unnecessary energy, turning intelligence into both shield and weapon. In a world where disputes are rarely declared but always underway, understanding psychological warfare means having the ability to survive and thrive amid the jungle of human relationships. If the 48 Laws of Power revealed the social dynamics of domination and the art of seduction, exposed the game of desire, then the laws of human nature goes even deeper. It descends into the psychological foundations that govern every human gesture. Published in 2018, This book presents itself as the mature synthesis of Greene's work, for it deals not only with external strategies, but with what constitutes us internally, our instincts, traumas, emotional vices, and unconscious patterns. Greene argues that to understand others and even oneself, it is indispensable to recognize the invisible forces that move the mind. It is as if he was saying, before trying to manipulate or resist manipulation, learn to see the hidden foundations of the psyche. At the heart of the work is the idea that when no one is watching, the human being reveals their true self. Politeness, the social mask, the varnish of morality, all of this can be performed in public. But in solitude emerge envy, resentment, insecurity, repressed desires, and fears that define us. Greene shows that these elements do not disappear when we face others. On the contrary, they remain active, only disguised. This duplicity explains why so many people are surprised to discover hidden facets in friends, colleagues, or leaders. The author affirms that the essence of human behavior is not pure rationality, but a chaotic mixture of deep emotions that shape seemingly logical decisions. To organize this investigation, Greene divides his analysis into different laws that govern human nature. Among them is the law of irrationality, which affirms that no matter how much we like to think of ourselves as rational beings, we are governed by emotional impulses that often sabotage our choices. Another is the law of envy, which reveals how this silent feeling corrodes relationships and exists even in the closest bonds. There is also the law of appearance of grandeur, which shows how easily we are seduced by images of confidence and authority, even when they lack substance. Each law functions as an uncomfortable mirror, forcing the reader to recognize in themselves weaknesses they would rather deny. The most unsettling point of the book is the affirmation that no one is immune to these mechanisms. It does not matter the level of intelligence or experience. Everyone carries insecurities, illusions, and secret desires that make them predictable and manipulable. Greene insists that ignoring this means becoming easy prey, while recognizing and studying these forces means acquiring a strategic advantage. He even suggests that understanding human nature is the true form of wisdom, more powerful than any technique of seduction or law of power. For those who know the hidden gears of the mind, know not only how to protect themselves from the manipulations of others, but also how to influence others with surgical precision. Another powerful point of the work is the use of history and biography to illustrate these laws. Greene cites figures such as Cicero, Martin Luther King Jr., Elizabeth I, and even anonymous individuals, showing how their virtues and flaws were rooted in universal laws of human behavior. The objective is not to demonize, but to reveal that even the greatest leaders and geniuses were subject to the same unconscious forces that govern us all. This perspective humanizes power, leadership, and even failure, for it shows that ultimately we are all driven by similar inner mechanisms, though disguised by different contexts. Most importantly, however, Greene does not treat this knowledge merely as a weapon for manipulation. He also proposes a path of self-mastery. Recognizing the laws of human nature does not mean only identifying the weaknesses of others, but above all facing one's own limitations. True mastery, he suggests, lies in seeing one's unconscious patterns, taming one's impulses, and transforming weaknesses into sources of strength. This is the difference between the shallow manipulator and the deep strategist. While the former loses themselves in external games, the latter learns to govern themselves, and from there, governs others. In the end, the laws of human nature is more than a manual of behavior. It is a cartography of the collective unconscious. It reveals what we truly are when no one is watching, and that is why it disturbs so much. It forces the reader to strip away illusions and recognize that beneath social masks, there are uncontrollable forces that shape life. Greene offers then a disturbing yet liberating invitation. Instead of denying your nature, accept it, understand it, and use that knowledge to live with greater clarity. For in the invisible theater of the mind, only those who know the hidden rules have a real chance of breaking free. Few themes generate as much debate around Robert Greene's work as the difference between manipulation and social intelligence. For many, his books are seen as manuals of manipulation, cold guides to dominate others without any concern for morality. However, Greene emphasizes that knowledge of human behavior can be used in two distinct ways: as a weapon to exploit and control, or as a tool to understand, negotiate, and coexist more efficiently. The central point lies precisely in this blurred frontier between manipulating and acting with social intelligence, between using knowledge as an instrument of domination or as a resource for adaptation and self-defense. Manipulation, according to Greene, is the intentional application of influence techniques to gain personal advantage, often at the expense of others. It is based on deceiving, distorting, and misleading in order to lead someone to make decisions they would not take if they had full awareness of the situation. It is the essence of laws such as conceal your intentions or discover each man's thumbscrew. Social intelligence, on the other hand, is a broader and less aggressive concept involving the ability to read emotions, recognize patterns, adapt behaviors, and create strategic connections without necessarily harming others. Both practices rely on the same foundation, the reading of human nature, but diverge in their purpose. One can be destructive, the other constructive. Greene argues that in any society, ignoring the mechanisms of manipulation does not make us ethical, only vulnerable. This is because there will always be individuals willing to use such artifices for their own benefit. Thus, understanding manipulation is not necessarily practicing it. It is, above all, building a defense against it. In this sense, the line between manipulation and social intelligence lies in the degree of awareness and the intention behind the action. A leader who knows the fears and desires of their team can manipulate to exploit, or they can use this knowledge to motivate and guide effectively. The same gesture can be seen as manipulation or as intelligent leadership, depending on the purpose and the impact. The ethical dilemma becomes even more intense because modern society values the discourse of authenticity, but in practice, it continues to reward those who master the invisible game of perceptions. Greene shows that even those who publicly condemn manipulation use it at some level. A politician who adjusts their speech to the emotions of the crowd, an influencer who builds an idealized image, an executive who conceals intentions in a negotiation. Manipulation is everywhere, even if masked by subtlety. Social intelligence, in turn, is the refined version of this process, in which reading people does not serve only to exploit, but to harmonize, to persuade without violence, and to adapt to circumstances. This debate is crucial because it questions the very essence of power. If power is inevitable, as Greene suggests, then all of us play, to a greater or lesser degree, with techniques of influence. What remains to be decided is whether we will use this game in a predatory or constructive way. Pure manipulation creates distrust, resentment, and long-term destruction, while social intelligence can build bridges, foster cooperation, and open paths for mutual growth. However, even this more positive view is not exempt from criticism, because in the end, any use of influence involves directing other people's choices, reducing their absolute freedom. Greene does not provide ready-made moral answers, but makes it clear that knowing the mechanisms of manipulation is indispensable. He shows that ethics in this field is not about denying the existence of the game, but choosing how to play it. The frontier between manipulation and social intelligence is thin and constantly crossed, but it is also the space where power manifests with the greatest intensity. The individual who masters this difference becomes more dangerous, but also more prepared. Ultimately, the ethical limit of control lies in recognizing that, although manipulation is inevitable at some level, it is up to the strategist to decide whether to use knowledge as a weapon of destruction or as a tool for coexistence. Robert Greene built his works on a conviction. History is not merely a succession of facts, but a living laboratory of strategies, where leaders, courtiers, generals, and seducers left eternal lessons on how power is gained, maintained, or lost. For this reason, his books are filled with historical characters who function as case studies, vivid illustrations of the laws he describes. These examples not only make his works more engaging, but also reinforce the universality of the rules of the human game. Power, after all, is not a phenomenon reserved for kings or dictators, but a constant that repeats itself in every relationship, whether in a golden throne room or in a corporate boardroom. One of the most recurring names in Greene's writings is Machiavelli, author of The Prince. For Greene, Machiavelli was not the devil portrayed by many critics, but a political realist who revealed the inner workings of power in its rawest state. His idea that ruling requires both virtue, strength, cunning, and fortuna, luck, circumstance, resonates in Greene's laws, especially those concerning concealing intentions, crushing enemies, and cultivating one's image. Machiavelli became an inevitable reference because he exposed that politics does not rest on ideals, but on strategies, a point Greene emphasizes by updating this thought for the contemporary world. Another central figure is Sun Tzu, the Chinese strategist of the 6th century before Christ and author of The Art of War. Greene sees in Sun Tzu the essence of psychological warfare, winning without fighting, manipulating perceptions, and exploiting weaknesses before conflict even arises. Many of his strategies resonate directly in the 33 strategies of war, particularly regarding the use of misinformation, the control of timing, and the principle of attacking the enemy where he is weakest. Sun Tzu demonstrates that victory does not lie in brute force, but in intelligence, calculation, and mastery of the invisible, a lesson Greene adapts for modern negotiations, politics, and even personal relationships. Another frequently cited example is Talleyrand, the French diplomat who navigated opposite regimes, from the absolutism of Louis XVI to Napoleon's empire and the restoration of the monarchy, while always keeping his influence intact. Greene presents him as a master of ambiguity and strategic patience. Talleyrand knew when to speak, and above all when to remain silent. He mastered the art of never fully committing, thus staying useful to any regime that came to power. He personifies the law of maintain independence and conceal your intentions, for he survived decades of political upheaval precisely because he never revealed his entire game. Greene's examples also include Cleopatra, the ultimate icon of seduction as a weapon of power. More than her beauty, it was her strategic intelligence that made her a central figure in the politics of Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra skillfully manipulated symbols, enchanted powerful leaders, and projected an almost mythical aura that made her irresistible. She embodies the archetypes described in The Art of Seduction, especially that of the sovereign queen, whose magnetic presence subjugates opponents without ever losing control. Equally important is Louis XIV, the Sun King, whom Greene highlights as an example of theatricality and image building. Louis turned the French court into a permanent performance, where every gesture, ritual, and detail reinforced his aura as a divine ruler. He applied, in essence, the law of make others dependent on you, for he centralized power around his figure, keeping nobles distracted with vanity contests while consolidating his absolute authority. His ability to turn politics into spectacle demonstrates the principle that perception is reality, one of Greene's core ideas. These characters, along with many others that appear throughout Greene's works, serve as living metaphors for the game of power. They are figures who, though belonging to different historical contexts, reveal universal patterns: the necessity of projecting an image, the importance of strategic patience, the effectiveness of emotional manipulation, and the value of dissimulation. By analyzing them, Greene shows that human nature has changed little over the centuries. What varies are the settings: thrones, palaces, parliaments, or social media, but the gears of power remain the same. Ultimately, the historical examples Greene employs fulfill a dual role. They fascinate the reader with vivid narratives of intrigue and, at the same time, warn that such strategies are still present in everyday life. The message is clear: if kings, generals, and courtiers depended on these laws to survive, none of us are immune to them. Knowing these stories, therefore, is more than culture. It is a form of self-defense in the endless theater of human relations. If in The Art of Seduction, Robert Greene analyzed archetypes and historical strategies of seducers that spanned centuries, today the stage where these games of desire and influence take place has radically changed. The digital world has become the new psychological battlefield, where the weapons are no longer just glances, gestures, and face-to-face narratives, but carefully constructed profiles, manipulated images, and invisible algorithms that can amplify or destroy reputations in a matter of hours. Seduction, in this scenario, is no longer just a game between individuals, but has transformed into a mass spectacle, where every like, every comment, and every share functions as a symbol of power. The difference is that, in the digital environment, seduction never rests. It happens 24 hours a day across multiple platforms for an infinite audience. Greene never wrote directly about social networks like Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, but his principles fit perfectly into this new universe. The Pamtamustaran archetype, for example, which attracts crowds with brilliance and unattainability, today finds echoes in influencers who cultivate an aura of perfection and mystery, displaying only fragments of life that create desire and curiosity. The Bamisas charmer archetype, based on empathy and personal attention, is replicated in content creators who interact directly with followers, giving the illusion of closeness and intimacy. What has changed is not the essence of seduction, but the tools. Now, instead of royal courts or Parisian cafes, the stage is global and instantaneous. Another central aspect of digital seduction is image manipulation. In the past, a seducer had to control rumors and public appearances. Today, it is enough to control the camera angle, the photo filter, or the editing of a video. The construction of an online persona has become as important, or even more so, than the reality behind it. Ordinary people can turn into icons of desire simply by staging a convincing lifestyle. And as Greene emphasizes, perception is reality. What matters is not so much what is true, but what seems to be true. This mechanism explains why so many fall under the spell of digital influencers, often without realizing they are being guided through a carefully planned game. Seduction in the digital age also operates on the logic of scarcity and prohibition, one of the triggers Greene always highlighted. By limiting access, creating exclusive content, or giving the sensation of entering a restricted circle, digital seducers spark intense desire in their followers. The psychology behind this is simple. The more inaccessible something seems, the more valuable it becomes. Thus, celebrities and influencers apply, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes deliberately, the law that the forbidden fascinates. Close friends, features, private groups, and paid content are in essence modern versions of old courtly games, in which only the chosen few could participate. But the digital field is not only a space for individual seduction, it is also a territory of psychological warfare on a global scale. Algorithms decide who will be seen, who will be ignored, who will be elevated to stardom, and who will fall into oblivion. This means that digital seduction depends not only on individual talent, but also on one's ability to understand and manipulate the invisible rules of technology. In this sense, true online seduction involves not only enchanting people, but also seducing the machines that mediate visibility. The one who understands how to please the algorithm gains almost unlimited power over public perception. However, this new form of seduction also brings even greater risks. If in the past a seducer could be destroyed by local rumors, today a single mistake can go viral to millions within minutes, destroying careers, relationships, and reputations. The volatility of digital seduction is both its strength and its weakness. The same audience that idolizes today may abandon tomorrow. The same image that enchants can, in seconds, become a reason for contempt. Greene would certainly argue that, in this arena, the ability to reinvent oneself and control narratives is more vital than ever. In summary, seduction in the digital age is the extension of Greene's ideas into a globalized, hyper-connected universe dominated by the psychology of the masses. What was once restricted to face-to-face encounters has now become a permanent spectacle before billions of eyes. And just as in the past, those who understand that desire is born not only from what is shown, but above all from what is concealed, continue to prevail. The internet has not changed the essence of seduction. It has only expanded it to uncontrollable dimensions. Whoever understands this game holds in their hands a powerful weapon, but also an immense responsibility, for in the digital field, the line between enchanting and destroying is thinner than ever. Among all the psychological triggers analyzed by Robert Greene, none is as universal and powerful as prohibition. It is based on a simple yet disturbing observation. Human beings are irresistibly drawn to what is denied to them. From childhood, we learn that the forbidden object is the most desired, that the distant fruit seems sweeter, that the guarded secret awakens more curiosity than any explicit revelation. This mechanism is so deeply rooted in the psyche that it transcends cultures, eras, and contexts. Greene demonstrates that prohibition not only awakens desire but multiplies it. transforming something ordinary into a symbol of obsession. The fascination of prohibition can be explained through the logic of scarcity. That which is unavailable gains value precisely because it is inaccessible. A censored book attracts more readers than one freely distributed. A forbidden relationship ignites more passion than a socially accepted one. A denied privilege generates more ambition than any legitimate achievement. Greene observes that leaders, strategists, and seducers throughout history have always exploited this mechanism. The harder the access, the greater the prestige. Kings maintained exclusive rituals to reinforce the aura of power. Courtiers created artificial barriers to appear more desirable. Seducers hid behind the veil of inaccessibility to incite pursuit. In everyday life, the same logic repeats itself in subtle ways. In the corporate environment, restricted information generates more anxiety and speculation than reports available to everyone. On social media, private profiles or paid content spark more curiosity than what circulates freely. Greene shows that secrecy and scarcity are the fuel of desire, and whoever masters this mechanism can manipulate emotions almost automatically. The forbidden does not need to be truly valuable, it only needs to appear inaccessible to become an object of obsession. A classic example of this principle can be found in politics. When regimes attempt to censor an idea, they often end up strengthening it. What was meant to be silenced transforms into a banner of resistance, gaining force precisely because it is prohibited. Greene associates this with an unavoidable truth. The human mind is programmed to resist repression, to seek what is denied, to rebel against limitations. This tendency explains everything from historical revolts to small acts of personal rebellion in daily life. The fascination with prohibition is, therefore, a driving force of history, responsible for social changes, revolutions, and cultural transformations. In the intimate sphere, this mechanism manifests itself with even greater intensity. Secret relationships, impossible passions, and forbidden loves often become more intense than those socially accepted. Greene explains that this happens because prohibition adds risk, danger, and excitement, ingredients that intensify desire. What is allowed tends to become ordinary, but what is forbidden is wrapped in an aura of adventure, of heroic conquest against the system. That is why, in so many stories, forbidden romances are remembered more than stable relationships. They carry the mark of transgression, of risk, of intensity that surpasses the limits of routine. Another fundamental aspect of this fascination is the connection between prohibition and imagination. When something is denied to us, we are forced to fill it with fantasy. The forbidden cannot be fully known, and this incompleteness opens space for the mind to idealize it, to transform it into something greater than it really is. Greene shows that this dynamic is exploited by seducers and manipulators. By hiding details, by restricting access, by insinuating instead of revealing, they cause desire to grow without offering anything concrete. The forbidden in this case is a blank canvas, where the victim projects their own fantasies. Ultimately, the fascination with prohibition reveals both the fragility and the power of the human mind. We are programmed to crave the unattainable, to chase what withdraws, to value what is denied to us. Greene does not present this as a moral flaw, but as a constant of human nature. And as in all his works, the knowledge of this law serves two purposes: to protect oneself against those who exploit it, and if desired, to use it strategically. Whether in relationships, politics, business, or culture, the forbidden will remain irresistible. For deep down we desire not only what we can have, but above all what we are told we can never achieve. Among all of Robert Greene's reflections, perhaps none is as essential as the notion that true power does not lie in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. This idea, which he develops repeatedly throughout his works, functions both as a synthesis and as a breaking point. After presenting readers with dozens of laws on manipulation, psychological warfare, seduction, and external strategies, Greene points out that all of it becomes useless if the individual is a slave to his own emotions. Self-mastery, therefore, is not just a moral virtue, but the foundation of all practice of power. It is the supreme law, the one that silently governs all others. Human beings, according to Greene, are constantly sabotaged by internal impulses: fear that paralyzes, anger that blinds, envy that consumes, vanity that deceives. These invisible enemies are more dangerous than any external adversary because they act from within, corroding clarity and compromising decisions. Generals who lost decisive battles, leaders who ruined empires, and even seducers whose charm turned to tragedy, all were, at some point, defeated not by external forces, but by inner flaws. At this point, Greene approaches philosophical traditions such as Stoicism. Those who rule themselves cannot be dominated, but those who are governed by their emotions have already entered battle at a disadvantage. Self-mastery, however, does not mean rigid repression or total suppression of feelings. For Greene, it is a strategic practice, recognizing one's own emotional patterns, anticipating instinctive reactions, and transforming weaknesses into weapons of control. For example, awareness of one's anger allows it to be used as controlled energy rather than a destructive outburst. Recognition of envy allows it to be channeled into productive ambition rather than paralyzing resentment. In this sense, mastering oneself means becoming an internal strategist, capable of commanding one's own psyche as a general commands an army. This supreme law also connects with the notion of image and reputation, so central to Greene's works. After all, the individual who does not master himself loses control over how he is perceived. The one who shows desperation in a negotiation has already surrendered power. The leader who reveals panic in the face of crisis has already lost authority. The seducer who appears obsessed loses his charm. Self-mastery, on the other hand, creates an aura of invincibility. The mere fact of someone remaining calm amid chaos conveys to others the perception of absolute strength. And as Greene always emphasizes, in the game of power, perception is reality. Another essential point is that self-mastery is the only way to guarantee true freedom. Those who depend on constant approval from others, who allow themselves to be manipulated by praise or criticism, who react instinctively to provocations, live shackled by invisible chains. Greene shows that many times we believe we are in control, but in practice we are puppets of our own emotions. Self-mastery breaks those chains, allowing the individual to act according to rational calculations and strategic objectives, and not as a hostage of external stimuli. This is the purest form of power, the freedom of not being controlled by anything but one's own will. However, achieving this level of inner control is an arduous task, perhaps the most difficult of all. It requires discipline, self-knowledge, and constant practice. Greene does not offer magic formulas, but suggests careful observation of oneself, analysis of recurring patterns, and the adoption of practices that strengthen the mind against destructive impulses. It is a process of psychological training that echoes the teachings of philosophers, warriors, and spiritual leaders throughout history. All of them, in different ways, pointed out that victory over others begins with victory over oneself. In summary, the supreme law of self-mastery places power in a new perspective. More than crushing enemies, manipulating emotions, or building images, the true master of power is the one who cannot be shaken, who maintains clarity in the midst of chaos, and who acts strategically even in the face of adversity. Greene reminds us that, in the theater of life, there is no greater spectacle than watching someone remain unshaken in the face of storms. For in the end, the power that no one can take away is the control we have over ourselves. And in this silent mastery lies the essence of true strength. Since the release of the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene has been the target of intense debate. For some, he is a visionary writer, capable of revealing the invisible gears of human relationships and providing tools of self-defense in a hostile world. For others, he is a dangerous author, almost a prophet of cynicism, accused of encouraging manipulation, betrayal, and emotional coldness as legitimate forms of advancement. This ambiguity has become inseparable from his public persona. Greene is simultaneously admired as a sage and attacked as a guide for manipulators. This duality is not accidental, but a direct consequence of the brutally realistic style with which he presents his ideas. His harshest critics argue that his works reduce social life to a game of power, in which feelings such as loyalty, friendship, and love are nothing more than temporary instruments of influence. For these opponents, books like The Art of Seduction transform human relationships into cold strategies of conquest, encouraging readers to see people not as partners, but as targets. The same goes for the 48 Laws of Power, which many classify as a manual for manipulators, dictators, and opportunists. Numerous reviews describe his works as dangerous, claiming they provide intellectual justification for unethical behavior. Greene, however, has always countered these criticisms with a clear argument. He did not invent the rules of power, he merely described them. The author insists that his works are not invitations to malice, but survival manuals. In his own words, ignoring the game of power does not make it disappear. It only makes people more vulnerable to those who consciously play it. In this sense, he compares himself to a doctor diagnosing a disease. Revealing the symptoms may be uncomfortable, but it is the first step toward facing it. The difference lies in how each reader chooses to use this knowledge. Even so, the controversy persists because, ultimately, Greene chooses not to soften his truths. He does not write to comfort, but to expose. This frankness is interpreted by many as an apology for cynicism, mainly because his historical examples often exalt figures known for their cruelty or skillful manipulation. Leaders who crushed enemies, courtiers who betrayed masters, seducers who destroyed reputations, all are presented not as villains to be condemned, but as strategists to be studied. This approach shocks because it challenges ingrained moral values, but it also explains why his books continue to be read and discussed decades after their publication. Another recurring controversy is the impact of his ideas on young and impressionable audiences. Many educators and psychologists criticize the popularity of the 48 Laws of Power among students and early career professionals, fearing that the book may serve as justification for toxic behavior in workplaces and relationships. For them, uncritical reading can transform the search for self-defense into the adoption of systematic manipulation. Greene, on the other hand, argues that knowledge itself is neither moral nor immoral. Only the use made of it defines its character. Thus, he places responsibility on the reader for the choices they will make after understanding the mechanisms he describes. Paradoxically, the criticisms seem only to amplify his influence. The label of dangerous author has made Greene an even more attractive figure for those who wish to explore the darker side of human nature. In many circles, reading his works has become a gesture of intellectual rebellion, a way of defying moral conformism and confronting truths that most prefer to ignore. The implicit prohibition his books carry, the idea that they deal with something that should not be spoken of, functions as the very psychological trigger of prohibition he so often describes. The more he is criticized, the more irresistible Greene becomes. In summary, the controversies surrounding Robert Greene do not diminish his legacy, but reinforce it. He occupies a singular place in contemporary culture, that of a writer who dares to speak about the hidden mechanisms of power without disguises, even if it makes him the target of accusations. For some, he is a dangerous guide who arms manipulators with new tools. For others, he is a demystifier who frees readers from social illusions. What is certain is that, by revealing what many try to conceal, Greene fulfills the role of every provocative thinker, forcing society to look at what it would rather ignore. Robert Greene has achieved something rare, transforming dense books, filled with historical examples and psychological reflections, into works that not only endure over time, but also find new life with each generation. While many authors remain trapped in the context of their era, Greene managed to create a timeless line of thought that speaks to leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, young students, and even digital content creators. The secret of his longevity lies in two main factors: the universality of the laws he describes and the way his ideas easily adapt to the new languages of contemporary culture. That is why, decades after the release of his first works, he continues to be one of the most quoted, debated, and reproduced authors on social media. Greene's relevance today can be seen in the phenomenon of the viralization of his phrases and laws. YouTube channels, TikTok profiles, and Instagram pages turn excerpts from the 48 Laws of Power or the Art of Seduction into short videos accompanied by intense music and striking images. These fragments, which condense his vision into direct and provocative maxims, fit perfectly with the fast-paced rhythm of the digital age. Thus, a law written in 1998 can gain millions of views in 2025, proving that Greene's appeal does not diminish, but only changes format. His work has become an inexhaustible repertoire of viral content, and each new digital platform seems to find in it material to capture the attention of the masses. Another reason for his cultural immortality is that Greene speaks directly to the dilemmas of modernity. In a world where everyone competes for attention, status, and influence, his ideas on manipulation, social masks, and psychological warfare become even more relevant. The logic of algorithms, which reward images of power and self-confidence, seems to confirm his theories about perception and reality. The discourse of authenticity often fails when faced with the strength of digital performance, and the audience recognizes that Greene had already anticipated these dynamics by showing that all social life is a theater of power. Thus, he becomes not only an analyst of the past but also a prophet of the digital age. Furthermore, Greene's legacy is reinforced by his refusal to offer comforting illusions. In a culture saturated with motivational speeches that preach unconditional positivity, he stands out precisely for presenting a realistic, almost clinical view of human nature. This brutal honesty, however uncomfortable it may be, resonates with readers and listeners who seek tougher and more consistent explanations for the chaos of social relations. That is why, instead of being forgotten, Greene becomes increasingly relevant. He offers not what we would like to hear, but what we need to face. The impact of his work also lies in the fact that it transcends cultural boundaries. The 48 Laws of Power has been translated into dozens of languages and is read in contexts as diverse as American prisons, European universities, military barracks, and executive offices in the Middle East. This universality reinforces Greene's thesis that the pursuit of power is a human constant, regardless of time, place, or social class. Wherever there is interaction between people, there will be power games, and therefore, his laws will continue to be studied, applied, and debated. Ultimately, Greene remains immortal because he has been able to combine depth with applicability. His books are not only intellectual exercises, but also practical tools that can be used both to protect oneself from manipulation and to achieve influence. He occupies a unique space. He is, at the same time, a philosopher, a strategist, and a chronicler of human psychology. And as long as the world continues to be driven by ambition, desire, and fear, his ideas will keep circulating, whether in the pages of physical books, in podcasts, in lectures, or in short videos that spread like wildfire across social media. Thus, Robert Greene's legacy is not only in his written words, but in the fact that he managed to capture the immutable essence of the human being. By doing so, he ensured that his voice would not disappear with time. On the contrary, every new social crisis, every new political conflict, every new cultural transformation only reinforces the validity of his laws. Greene did not just write about power, he himself became an icon of intellectual power, and that is why in the present and the future he will continue to be an inescapable reference, a constant shadow in the backstage of the human mind, and above all, an author who will never cease to be rediscovered.